Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural launch of the PSG Think Big South Africa competition. And this, of course, in collaboration with Economic Research South Africa. I'm Alicia Seckham, and I'm going to be hosting you today as PSG invites the country's big picture thinkers to apply their minds and come up with solutions to some of our country's most pressing issues. Through this competition, PSG and URSA are looking for South Africans to become involved and put forward constructive solutions for a sustainable future. And this by presenting a discussion document on how to tackle some of the deeply intertwined challenges that are limiting today South Africa's true growth potential, right? Of course, while PSG looks to contribute to South Africa's growth by playing an active role in driving its progress, we've got URSA on the other side of the coin serving as a nexus between economic research and key policy dialogues. And they hold the belief that meticulous and well-articulated, targeted research communicated to policymakers can, in fact, meaningfully contribute to policy and can, at the end of the day, catalyze economic progress by tackling some of the challenges we as a country face head on. So I'm going to introduce our panelists who are going to be in conversation with me this morning. We have 4 of our 5 judges of this year's competition with us, 3 expected to be in person, and I say expected because we've got Professor William Gumede, who's with WITS, running a bit late, so we'll sneak him into the conversation when he arrives. But for now, Michael Sachs, who's adjunct professor at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at WITS. We've got Mamokete Lijane, who's chair at URSA and strategist in global markets as well. And then joining us online is Professor Philippe Berger, who's professor of economics and dean of the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences at the University of the Free State. So welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today. To our live audience with us in the room and those of you online, thanks for being a part of this conversation as well. I'm going to take things into the online space to start off with. So let's bring the virtual realm closer. Philippe, right at the top, what's your response to those out there right now saying, surely we don't need any more plans. We don't need any more proposals. South Africa may fall short on a lot of things, but blueprints certainly isn't one of them. Your response?
My response is, I think largely they are correct. Yes, we do know what is wrong with the economy. We know what needs to be done. We know about all the all the investment that needs to be done and all the infrastructure that needs to be created. I think the main question is, how are we going to do that?
Yes, and that is what we're here to do, right? So let's set the scene a bit better, Michael, because 3 decades after the end of apartheid, we're looking at an economy that is still defined by stagnation, that is still defined by exclusion. So why is current strategy or current policy not achieving inclusion and empowerment in practice?
I think just accepting what you've just said is an important starting point, because what you've just said is that current policy is not achieving inclusion and growth in practice. And I think we don't need to remind anybody of the depth of the crisis that we're facing as a country. It's been almost 15 years since this economy has grown in real terms. Unemployment has, 10 years ago, was about 5 million people were unemployed or discouraged. Mm-hmm. Today, there are 10 million people unemployed or discouraged. And so that graph keeps going up and up. And if we acknowledge, because I think, there's this mantra that people, particularly people in government, like to repeat, that we have good policies but bad implementation. If we acknowledge that for 10 years the economy has not grown, that unemployment has more than doubled in that period, the starting point has to be that there is fundamental reform of policy that is required. And reform is not easy. Reform always generates winners and losers. And I think the blockage we face, in a sense, it's a product of our history and the way the democratic society was born. We were born in a context where we wanted to create a win-win situation for all. But it's very difficult to find win-win situations when you have to move off this track of decline and stagnation onto one that is of growth and employment. You're going to have to break some eggs to make that omelette. And I think we're very good at kind of designing things that appear to be wonderful things to achieve. But when it comes to say the omelette is going to taste very nice, but when it comes to breaking the eggs, we become shy. And then we say we have good policy but bad implementation. But actually a policy that doesn't clearly identify the winners and losers and how we're going to deal with that is not a good policy.
Okay, so let's home in now and tap into an actual example, Mamokete. Tools for transformation like BEE policy were brought about to hit targets of inclusion, empowerment, transformation, right? Why has that policy proven to be ineffective or less effective than it was expected to be?
Yeah, I mean, you like throw the tough question at me. But anyway.
William is coming. He will answer.
Let me think about this. I mean, I think there isn't one universally accepted truth, I don't believe, in South Africa around the effectiveness, the appropriateness of BEE as currently implemented. But I'm going to take a stab at it. But I'm just going to put it as a caveat out there that there's probably going to be some people who disagree with me vehemently and with reason. So the way BEE was implemented seemed to me to be more about creating new elites versus it being about the real transformation of society and how society worked and how the economy worked. So we have a very, very extractive economy. And what we did with BEE is we created a new mix of extractors, but the underlying dysfunction remains. There's a lot of things that BEE did not address. For example, the fact that you still have very unequal labor markets, for example. There's things like spatial planning. There's things like education provision. There's things like the basic inequality. At the end of the day, all you've done is created a new, or at least augmented the class of, extractors. And that's really what BEE has done. So I suppose I'm trying to say here that at the end of the day, what you're trying to fix, what you're trying to solve for, you're trying to solve for all of South Africa versus changing the complexion of the rich and the poor. And the poor still remain poor, and nobody really cares about them. It's just that, you've got a new class. So for me, BEE as designed at the moment is a tax on corporate activity, because you've got people that haven't contributed to the generation of wealth, taking a bigger share of it. And there was a necessity of changing the power brokers within the economy and making that system more legitimate. But the big job of what do you do with unemployed people, etc., still remains.
I came across a comment from Maletsi Mbeki not so long ago where he said, it in fact works to not build and develop skills, know-how, and confidence amongst the black community to take risk, to plan for business, to see that growth. It's a policy that doesn't develop a productive growth, and that amongst some of the challenges. Philippe, I'm going to bring you back in here. There are binding constraints that we've got to take into consideration, right, that are systemic and structural, and that challenges the efficacy of any policy that gets put on the table. So meaning any proposal that gets put forward now is going to have to address at the base the systemic challenges, which, if you don't, is going to thwart any solution from the onset, right?
That's correct. And I think we need to distinguish between, shorter term binding constraints and longer term constraints. So on the shorter term, it's basically the things we've been talking about ad nauseum in everywhere, the things that prevent us from investment and so on. So there's a number of structural and policy limitations. There's things that prevent people from investing properly. When we look at the longer term growth, there's a set of other binding constraints. And I think she talked about a number of them and mentioned, and I think there's really a number of them that we need to keep in mind. So if Michael mentioned the huge increase we've seen in the unemployed. When you look at the discouraged unemployed, the first question you need to ask is, where are these discouraged unemployed people, where are they located? And we find them very often in what we call deep rural areas. But if you look at the data, you'll see that about half of them are on communal land areas, which is very far away from where the economic activities in the country happen. So for those who find them in that situation, it's extremely difficult to go search for jobs. It's expensive to go search for jobs. We have something similar in terms of our spatial setups in cities, where it is extremely difficult for people to go and search for a job. If you think about the transport cost for somebody to go from a township area to go to a CBD or a business district to go look for work, you can maybe do that 1 or 2 days a week, but you can't do that every day of the week. It's just simply too expensive. So those are sort of the issues we need to think about. Okay. I also want to mention, in terms of South Africa's informal sector, and if you look at the number of unemployed people in the country, what is interesting is that depending on whether you use the official or the broader definition of unemployment, there's between 2 to 3 times as many people unemployed as there are people in the informal sector. And one of the questions would be is, why are those unemployed not entering the informal sector? Are there barriers of entry into that sort of sector? So there's a number of these things. Then, of course, the one big binding constraint I do think is in the long run is the education system. We brag every year about the number of matrics, but when we look at how we fare internationally in comparison to other countries, and I'm not just talking about advanced economies, but also some emerging economies, we are not doing that well in things like math and sciences, and that's really the pool where you need to draw on if you want to educate and bring up the next generation of engineers, of doctors, of managers. And we really need to look at those things. So it's really, we need to distinguish between the shorter and medium term constraints that requires some breaking of eggs, as Michael has talked about. And then there's the longer term ones that are also really serious, but of course it's not going to win you in the next election. It's a bit long.
Absolutely. Okay, so that on a headline basis, the challenges that we're having to deal with, and we're going to be delving into each of those categories that you've highlighted, Philippe, that need solving for in no particular order, just so that we can start to spark a few ideas in terms of where focus needs to be if we're going to effectively start turning things around. William, thanks so much for joining the conversation this morning, and let's give him his introduction as it's due. Professor William Gumede is Political Associate Professor of Public and Development Management at the School of Governance at Wits, and he's founder and executive chairperson of Democracy Works Foundation as well. So welcome to you, William. Let's home in on education disparities first, because that is a main contributor to the vast inequality divide that we're looking at. Researchers seemingly good at describing the inequalities that are plaguing schools right now, but less successful perhaps in actually addressing those issues. So why are the many education reforms that we're seeing being put on the table not working to transform the system?
No, thank you, PSG for inviting me. I'm very grateful to be here, and apologies because I was something else.
We'll blame
I was doing
Joburg
something else.
traffic.
No, I was doing something else. But maybe just, to start off with, sadly, a lot of our binding constraints are political. Yeah. Quite a lot of that. So we have to overcome politics. And secondly, a lot of our binding constraints is based structurally on the past. So we have to. So with a lot of our binding constraints, we'll have to imagine ourselves out of it. So if we're going to have a different kind of imagination to deal with politics, to deal with some sort of the way we look at the past, and the way we're stuck in the past. In order to deal with some of the things. Let me just on the education and black economic empowerment. I mean, one of the mistakes we did when we introduced empowerment programs was not to make education the empowerment. But then there's the binding constraint. Why didn't we do that? Because there's a political binding constraint. It is easier to have a black economic empowerment program by giving political capitalists. So from government is easier because political capitalists, so their colleagues, their friends, and so on, their partners get slices from formerly white-owned companies. So, there's a political binding constraint. Easier for business to bring in politicians because that protects them from doing the thing. So I'm saying there's a binding constraints we have to deal with. So whereas education, if you look at all the post-war development anywhere of sort of the great economic miracles in Southeast Asia or the Brazilian miracle or any other, or in Mauritius, really is education was the empowerment thing. So it is like the political focus of getting quality competitive education. So the politics of education is, can one create in one generation competitive education? So when I say education that can compete globally.
Yeah.
And so on. So we didn't do that, but there's politics around it because you don't see it electorally in the first electoral cycle. Also, you don't see it politically in your party because these are ordinary citizens outside. And that really is an issue. And then the second binding constraint, really we have to deal with corruption is a binding constraint. We can do all the things that we want to do. But politically, if we don't deal with corruption, we're not going to anywhere. I mean, if you look again from where growth happened in spaces, we're going to have to reduce at least half the corruption in order to get 2 or 3 growth points.
Absolutely. Okay, so a lot to digest and unpack there. I'm going to home in on what you said about education and competing on a global scale, Mamakete, because I was doing some reading ahead of this conversation, right? And one of the problems that was cited is that we've got policies borrowed from overseas to keep up with the global competition without sufficiently understanding how to adapt them to suit our local environment and realities, especially considering some of the inherited educational inequalities. Do you agree?
No, I don't.
Good.
No, I don't. I think that there's this idea that countries always imagine themselves as particularly unique. And, obviously people are unique and you're from a unique place with a unique geography, a unique history. And it's interesting that William did bring that into play. But 1 + 1 on some level is always 2. So there's certain things that are generally applicable, right? And if you want to do things that are effective, you can really only start from where you are. So essentially what you need to do has to be suited for your context. But the outcomes should be more or less the same, right? You want the same things because we know what it is that works in the global environment. And just to give you an example, for instance, a lot of people say, well, how did China achieve what it achieved? As a communist country, they managed to get multiple years of growth. And the question is, do we need authoritarianism to get growth and to get increases in productivity, etc.? But you can see that democracies have been able to achieve the same thing. And actually, under the hood, when you look at what it is that these people kind of like emphasized export-led growth or whatever the case may be, whether you're a communist country or a democratic country, the story is the same. You need to have like reasonable costs of production so that you can compete with everybody else. And you also put in there like good a skilled workforce, and you're going to get to the same place. It doesn't really matter who you are. So I think this idea that, you know, there is something about international versus local, it's important in the minutiae of how you can execute, you know, talking about your politics, your history, and all of those other things, who the winners and the losers are, what the trade-offs have got to be, and how you accommodate the trade-offs that you've got to make. But what it is that you need to do doesn't really change.
Okay, so let's then look at what you need to do, Michael. If we keep it to the education sphere here, right? Give us an example or two of elements of policies that have worked to an extent, but perhaps not completely, or policies that were scrapped along the way that perhaps need to be reimagined and brought back to life if we're going to start changing what we're seeing play out in the education space specifically.
So what you've seen playing out in the education space over the last 5 to 10 years is resources being allocated on the basis of political salience. And I say this because there's been a huge expansion in resources provided to graduate students, and in particular university students. Whereas the policy that we're trying to achieve aims to first of all build the education system from the bottom, in other words, from early childhood development. The central problem we have to solve is the high school system, or the basic education system, and that failures in the level of basic education translate into poor outcomes at the level of higher education. But higher education is where we're putting all of our resources. So the question becomes, I don't like so much William's, the way he put it, where he said we need to overcome the politics. Rather, the question is, you could think about the education system as having an organized constituency of students that are very salient. Every political party has a student wing. Students are voters. Children, young children going to early childhood development where the money is needed most, don't vote. And there's no baby's wing of any party so far. Maybe we should have it as part of the multi-party coalition, I don't know. But now we have to think creatively about how do we build a political momentum behind the reform that we all want. So maybe, and I'm just shooting at the moon here, maybe you say, well, the key constituency here is single mothers. Single mothers with small children is the constituency we want to mobilize behind education reforms. Because ultimately, I think it goes back to what we discussed earlier, that so much of our policy making and policy discussion is about how do we make the system work better? There's some deficiency in us which makes us unable to achieve the results that the system promises. So how do we fix ourselves so that the system works better? But actually the problem is, how do you reform the system? So if you're serious about reforming the basic education system, you are going to disrupt vested interests. Whether those are interests at the level of trade unions, whether they're the interests at the level of the political class and provincial governance, I don't know, I don't want to go into details, but you are not going to get better results, I think, on a dramatic basis by simply making the system work a little bit better. You actually have to put on the table an agenda to reform the education system. And that goes for many other spheres of policy, the same in healthcare, the same in local government, the same in criminal justice and security, that we have to look at what are the reforms, and those reforms are difficult, they're disruptive, they don't necessarily deliver results immediately, the results are uncertain. So the key challenge is, how do you mobilize that political constituency behind those disruptive reforms?
And that then shifting us into the infrastructure space, Mamukete, because it is illustrative, or it's illustrating right now, that when those political shifts happen, the kind of impact it can have. So if we look at crumbling infrastructure, electricity, water, rail, ports, telecom, security, I mean, they're all deteriorating dramatically, right? And this having an impact on the country's ability to produce. At the heart of it is collapsing state capacity. But we are seeing shifts as far as electricity generation is concerned. We're starting to see policy bring in private sector. Step in the right direction, right? That's what we want to see more of.
Yeah, so I mean, when it comes to social infrastructure, I've got a bit of a problem with getting the private sector to provide social infrastructure, and to some extent, power generation is social infrastructure. So it doesn't mean it cannot be done, and it should not be done. But I think it needs to be very carefully calibrated to make sure that everybody that needs the service gets it. Having said that, I mean, the problem that we ended up with as South Africa was we had a deficit of a very, very critical input into every sphere of economic and social life, which was power, right? So now you've got to say, you've got to work with what you have. Arguably, if you were talking 20 years ago, the state could have made decisions that were different, and we would still be in a situation where that, that capacity was being rolled out by the state. And I suppose it's speaking to this idea about like getting the private sector involved. So I think there is room for the private sector, but we're going to be dealing with a very interesting and challenging, environment where we're going to have to see how we accommodate that participation of the private sector in a way that the power is still being delivered in a way that is equitable for everybody. But the point you make is very right, that we argued for decades about, how do we deliver power more effectively, at least for a decade since we started experiencing challenges. And though you had the deficit in power generation, bumping into the constraint of the fiscal constraint from a revenue generation perspective, both of which actually were reinforcing. The two are reinforcing each other. And now you're in a situation where the private sector is coming in, into the breach, so to speak, at least from a capital perspective. The interesting thing with Eskom, as one has seen it evolve, is we've kind of like moved from a deep belief that power generation is strategic and it should be a state-provided good, to where we are now, where we've basically blown the whole thing wide open, and we've liberalized, whether we know it or not, essentially power generation in a way that we've never done before. And part of that was that there has been, even though there was contestation along the way, the crisis that we ended up in pushed all of us in one corner. I don't think there's any South African who disagrees that we need to have more power, and therefore we're willing to do anything that we needed to do to get it done. And that, to me, it's almost like, the burning platform thing, where it's now that this is the situation, all other consideration take a back seat. And what is my concern is everybody's concern. There is alignment, and the politics of it also was so clear, because people, voters, suddenly are responsive as well. So everybody's aligned.
Yeah. Philippe, as you get a sense sitting on your end of the world there, that this is not a platform necessarily of consensus. You are allowed to disagree, as Michael has shown us. So what's your view on this? Because, we're talking about this privatization or private sector being brought into the realms, and many are concerned about the pace, saying that this is global best practice that should have, in fact, been incorporated a long time ago, and we need to see it start to expand into other parts of the public service line. Do you agree or not?
Yes, I think if you have a look at which countries in the world really turned things around in the last, if we look at the big ones, okay, the Chinas, the Indias, Chile, those countries all found a model where the private sector is playing a much bigger role. It was not always all-out privatization. They worked out specific models. So a while ago, for instance, I read a book about what is happening in China and how on local government level there's cooperation between the local authorities and private firms. Okay, there's also problems, of course, with debt and so on. That's quite serious, but the point is that those models, those sort of partnerships assisted. But that means that we need to build trust between the public sector and the private sector. And I think essentially in South Africa, there's a lot or a lack of trust between those sectors. And when we look at this sort of cooperation, what sort of types of cooperation are we talking about? There's certain elements. There's finance. So what will be the role of the private sector in terms of finance of projects? There is who's going to build it? Is the system going to be clean in terms of tenders, or are you going to use public-private partners, whatever? Who's going to operate it? And what sort of income are you going to generate? So I'm going to give you just an example, because the e-tolls in Gauteng is a big issue. But you can have a public-private partnership in the form of where you charge tolls, or you can charge shadow tolls. And the shadow toll is where the cars are counted and the government pays a certain amount to the private operator. You can, if you want to improve access, you can have a mixed model. So there's all these sorts of things, and they have different implications for the fiscus, but also for the private sector, for who's carrying the risk. And all of that needs to be worked out, and not always in one grand design, but very often you need to say, okay, if we talk about infrastructure, roads and harbors, this is the model. If we talk about electricity, that is the model. So it could be very industry specific. It will need to be very industry specific. And we need to also see, what private sector capacity is there. Because if you think about just 20 years ago, you had these huge construction firms that were all still playing part in building for the World Cup in 2010, but how many of them have actually gone out of business? And we have lost a lot of those engineers who have now, in the meantime, went to Dubai or so on to pursue careers there. And now we sit with a lack of capacity there. So we need to look at all those sort of bottlenecks. We need to do it industry by industry, and then say, okay, when we look at finance, build, operate, income streams, we need to say what sort of permutations will we need in those partnerships. And then we need to be very pragmatic about it, to say, okay, we need to reconcile that, because the government's objective is to ensure delivery of a particular type and a particular quantity to a particular constituency. And we need to align that with the private sector's objective of making a profit. But we can align those objectives. They don't necessarily contradict each other, but we need to find a model where we can reconcile those and then take it forward. It has been done internationally, and not just in advanced economies, in a number of other economies. And I think that's largely the way forward.
William, in that conversation around, or in those partnerships, conversation starts to center around state capacity, right, and its involvement in those partnerships. We had a study by Harvard Growth Lab pointing out the overburdening of state organizations with, systems of political patronage, goals beyond their core mission as well. Do we need more policy latitude in that regard? So is the future of governance, is the future of efficiency pointing directly to dislodging a very tight control at the center and then sending it down?
I mean, one of the things that's clearly also come out is the ideological constraints. I mean, talking about binding constraints, there is ideological opposition against the private sector. And that is a binding constraint to growth. For example, we've got, what is our competitive advantage as emerging markets, even compared to our BRICS countries? It is our private sectors. It's got an extraordinary, we would have been a failed state if there wasn't a private sector in civil society. If we would have had a comparably less private sector, if we had the same as other emerging markets, this would be a failed state. Now, why not use the private sector to deliver the services, deliver the rail? If I mean, if the state fails, it seems very obvious, but there is and that's why it's ideological, it's a binding constraint. I mean, just on the state capacity, I mean, I have since 2009 been on 7 or 8 inquiries, national inquiries. So I just came from the inquiry that I set on the professionalization of the state. So I was a member of that inquiry, the 6, 7 Ramaphosa's inquiry on how do we make the state more professional. For example, I mean, again, there's a binding constraint. One of the obvious things is obviously to make it competent, to make it merit-based, to get the best people into the public service. I mean, no country after the Second World War have developed without a non-political public service and competent public service. But there's a binding constraint against it. I mean, our recommendation hasn't been implemented because one of the binding constraints being, well, actually, really, people want to deploy cadres who are politically to key positions. So it's a binding constraint. As the same as the private sector. I mean, if we, in the country in a crisis, we're in an economic crisis, but we've got a competitive private sector, so why don't we just get the private sector to deliver the services? How do we overcome that constraint that is ideologically opposed to using the private sector extensively, not using the private sector when there's a crisis, like now in Transnet. I mean, the crisis is now beyond, it's a colossal crisis, and then we bring in the private sector at the end, rather than at the front end, because the private sector is our competitive advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, just your take, because we haven't had yours on private sector involvement.
So first of all, the major difference between South Africa and other emerging markets, I would say, is that we have a large social state. This doesn't exist. The size of our state is much bigger than any other country, and I don't believe that is because we have a bloated state. In fact, there's very little evidence for that. The reason we have a large state is that we provide public services extensively to the population in the form of healthcare, in the form of basic education, in the form of criminal justice. And I think, in economics, going back many decades, maybe to the 1950s, the idea was like you had public goods which can only be provided by the state, and you have private goods which can only be provided by the private sector. But today, I think there's a realization that most goods, when you look at them, are mixed in character. They have a certain degree of privateness and a certain degree of publicness. And it's in those areas where you essentially have mixed goods, which are partly private, partly public, where we are seeing the collapse of services. Electricity, water, passenger rail, and others, where essentially the challenge is not the public sector cooperating with the private sector as such. The challenge is the public sector extracting payment for services from citizens. So in the case of electricity, we want the public sector, local government wants citizens to pay for electricity. But local government has no incentive to enforce that payment on the citizens. The political layer at local government has an incentive to reduce the payment. So where you have goods that are essentially public goods, like electricity and water, that can never be privatized. But in order to finance them, you need to extract payment from citizens. That's where we have the biggest problem. So we have collapse of passenger rail, we have collapse of electricity, we have collapse of water. And what that means is that the tax resources that are supposed to be financing public goods, pure public goods like basic education and healthcare and criminal justice, are now diverted into financing these quasi-public goods.
With that the reality, Michael, how do we start to tackle a challenge like spatial exclusion? Because that's still a very massive constraint that needs to be delivered on both in urban and rural areas. And that, despite well-intentioned post-apartheid housing policy. So what direct responses in that context, given the reality you've spelled out, are required to start getting that more right?
Again, we need to look at the incentives. No local government has an incentive to house working and poor people next to wealthy and affluent people. They don't have that incentive because as soon as they do that, they're going to lower property values. Therefore, they're going to lower their own rates collection. Therefore, they're going to undermine their own financial sustainability. So you really need, again, to break some eggs to make that omelette. You need national fiscal instruments that subsidize poor people to live in these affluent areas. So if you look at, for instance, the UK welfare state, the largest element of the UK welfare state in terms of fiscal commitment is rent subsidies. It's not child support grants and these kinds of, it's a rent subsidy that allows a working person to live in a place that they wouldn't otherwise be able to live in. In South Africa, arguably, I mean, I take the view that inequality hasn't increased since apartheid, but has been stable. But in the case of urban segregation and spatial segregation, arguably we are more segregated now than we were 30 years ago because of the emergence of gated communities across the affluent areas in Gauteng. Where we're sitting now in Sandton, there's Alex is over there, but we don't have any low-income housing. This suburb of Sandton and Rosebank has boomed massively over the last 30 years. But there is no space for low-income households, for the service workers that are working in Sandton to live in this area. It's impossible to achieve. So we need to, again, we can't just continue along the path we've been on. We actually need a new path that changes the trajectory.
So, that being said, Mamakete, what if we start getting growth going for us and working differently, so that growth works for society as a whole? William alluded to it a little earlier, the informal sector of the economy. Are we thinking enough about policies that account for the informal economy and start bringing them more so into the equation? Because there are bustling economies that are happening within, it's labeled now the Kasi economy, right?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting because I was actually matching it up with what Michael has said around this idea that you need to break the egg to make the omelette, and I don't think we're ready. So I always say South Africa, to my mind, is a third world country with first world, that is addicted to a first world aesthetic. So if you think about our bylaws, where people are allowed to move, where people are allowed to, to trade, etc., they're geared to literally create that separation between the first world economy and the third world economy. And that is why I think it's ridiculous, personally, that in Sandton, if I want to get food, I need to order an Uber and I pay 150 Rand for it, when somebody's selling food like less than 5 kilometers away at 20 Rand a plate. And the two cannot meet. And it's engineered to create that separateness. And I think if you think about, and this is one of the challenges, for instance, that I've kind of put to people that are in business who say this economy is not working, this economy is not growing. I think, we think about, people in South Africa unemployed as unproductive. So we've got this conversation about these people are not educated, they cannot do skilled labor, and therefore they cannot produce, and they must be, must be kept in their corner. How are we going to get out of this? We need to grow, and growth that benefits mostly this, and then it trickles down, and we'll give these people transfers, etc. But no adult is unproductive.
Yeah.
They might not have an education, but they're not productive. We're basically saying at some point we need to create pathways for those people to be productive. And part of that is actually allowing that informal economy to start to merge a little bit more into the formal economy. I don't know what that looks like, but for me, that's be a really interesting area of exploration.
It's absolutely fascinating, that entire sub-economy that's bustling, right? Philippe, let me bring you here at this point, right? Because a strict formalization of this informal economy isn't necessarily what's required here, but more so, I guess, a hybrid working model, right? To see what in some quarters is actually a burgeoning space start to now filter through and feed into our GDP numbers, our revenue numbers, etc. So how do we start converting what is rich commercial activity that happens in the Kasi economy that isn't as recognized as it potentially should be into the broader economy? What do you think needs to happen?
So I had a conversation once with somebody from Peru who was a minister of economy or something there. And she said to me, what is interesting about their informal sector is that they are more integrated with their formal sector. And I'll give you an example. So if you're a big company, you would, for cleaning services in your building, you would get one of the big providers. I will not name them now, but you'll get one of the big providers to
JSE listed company.
Yes, a JSE listed company to come and clean your offices for you. While in Peru, you would have a system where where you would actually empower people and say, okay, we will provide you with the basic equipment you need, vacuum cleaners, etc., to clean the building. We will help you and conclude a contract with you. And, we will help you to set up your medium or small enterprise to do that. And in that sense, you have a much better integration. Now, of course, our VAT system is now this is an informal business, so by definition, they're not registered for VAT. So there's how do you claim for input VAT? Okay, so now that brings us to the next step. When we talk about formalization, we very often think about this as a big bang approach. The one day you're informal sector, you're not registered for taxation, you don't have a bank account, you don't have permits, etc., etc. And the next day we expect you to have all of those things. I think that would be the completely wrong way to approach this. I think we need to look at a gradual process and say, okay, there are certain elements of your business that you can formalize when it is the right time to do that. But, maybe today you register as a business, tomorrow or in a year's time you register for VAT, and so you go along. But it depends on the type of business. And very much what we should be doing is to start off thinking about our business sector. We have very much this demarcated view of informal versus formal. Maybe a better way to think about it is like on a spectrum, from your multinational corporations on the one end of the spectrum all the way to your micro one-person enterprise. Now, when you look at data from Stats SA, the interesting thing is that these micro enterprises, when you look at the total employment coming from them, from the informal sector, about 800,000 people are employed in the informal sector. Somebody in the informal sector employs somebody else, employees. So I'm not talking about the self-employed. I'm talking about those who are employed. Now, that competes very much with the number of people working in agriculture, informal agriculture, or employed in formal agriculture, in mining. So this is a huge, huge sector that we shouldn't just ignore. And we need to look at better policies. I think it's Mamokedu who talked about zoning laws and so on. So there's a lot of work that people have done looking at that, and where we look at how do we empower these micro enterprises. And we need to also distinguish between those who do it for survivalist reasons, selling fruit on the street corner, and those who already have the germs of a true micro enterprise where they start thinking about doing something commercial.
Yeah.
And that also is a bit of a spectrum where we need to help people along and in the longer run try to formalize them. But that is not the formalization is not an end in itself. It is just an instrument to help you do your business to the best of
without being hamstrung by any red tape or burdensome policy at the end of the day. Look, we can't discuss absolutely
I feel
everything.
the discussion is only now starting to
happen.
to take off. Yeah.
This is 40 minutes in, and this is the time that we have. We may need a part 2 for this, but certainly providing some food for thought when it comes to, some of the problems and challenges that need tackling, that need to get an inclusive growth economy going. And I think at this point, it's important to note that, we could be formulating thinking around policies to secure, yes, your medium-term wins that will help the country achieve notable gains, but also long-term initiatives that are required to move the country forward as a whole. At this point, I'm going to open the conversation up to our audience members. If there are any questions that you might have for any of our panelists this morning, please indicate by show of hand, and a roving microphone will find its way to you. Any questions before we wrap things up from the audience today? There we go. We've got 2 questions here.
I'd just like to know from anyone on the panel who has some input, what they think about the current concessionary model with regard to public-private partnerships. Is there anything that should change there, or is it, as it exists, a good model to involve the private sector in the current economic climate?
William.
We're in an economic crisis right now. And it means that because we've got a competitive private sector, just let the private sector do the things. That's my view. Even as the current concessionary model is just too bureaucratic, too restrictive, and it takes too long. What we now need to do, in a crisis like our country, where we are now, I don't think that we've got a luxury to have these sort of expansive debates and long administrative processes. If rail is not working, can we the next day hand it over to the private sector? Obviously with certain kind of conditions and so on. That would be my suggested model is inadequate, too ideological, and it should just be made much more easier, and we should make it much more easier for the private sector to actually to deliver public services, because right now, in the short term, the state doesn't have the capacity. I have been sitting on 3 inquiries. I was the chief advisor on the state-owned enterprise inquiry, the presidential inquiry in 2009. We made all the recommendations. None of those recommendations on whether Eskom or Transnet 2009 have been implemented because there's no capacity. So what we need to do is actually to imagine ourselves out of the ideological, this logjam that's so much against the private sector, and just get the private sector and civil society to deliver the services where the state can't do that.
Okay.
Maybe I can add something there.
Yes, Philippe.
Yes. So in terms of PPPs, yes, I think when it was correct, it's a bit too bureaucratic in some cases. It is something, though, that, what I mentioned earlier, the finance, build, operate, transfer, all those types of things. The difficulty very often with a pure PPP is how do you ensure competitiveness? So, very often the number of firms that tender to become a private partner in a PPP is limited. You sit with 2 or 3 firms who have the capacity. And then, once you award the contract, and it's a 25-year contract for, let's say, operating a road or whatever, or a hospital, the competition disappears. And then 10 years down the line, if you work with user fees being paid by government, you get a private partner that says, hang on, we need to renegotiate because of cost pressures, etc. And then the state pays too much. So you have all those types of things that you really do need to keep an eye on, but they are manageable. Having said that, we need to also look at the, we live sometimes in the world of second bests. So you might not have the model of optimal delivery, but the alternative is non-delivery. And so those are sort of the trade-offs that you need to keep in mind when you look at public-private partnerships. They also have as a prerequisite that the government team managing this should be capable to manage the contract. Otherwise, the private partner and international literature has shown that to us, runs roughshod over them.
Absolutely. Philippe, we've got one more question from the audience, so let's make space for that.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thanks to PSG and URSA for organising such a great event. Pleasure to meet all the judges and hear a very interesting conversation. So one question that comes to mind, it was actually from an URSA publication a few years ago on their COVID project. Some researchers emphasized the importance of using cost-effective policies, given the large debt burden with service costs at the moment our government is faced with. And we've been discussing a lot about the private sector and the skills shortage and issues we've been facing with education. And one of the solutions they proposed was encouraging foreigners to come to the country and work here. Now, the first thing that many South Africans think of when we have policies like this is we fear that they would be taking jobs. But with people who are educated and skilled and interested in investing in the country in a good way, this research suggested it could contribute to economic growth substantially. As it's not replacing jobs, it's creating opportunity. Yeah. So I'd be interested in hearing your views about the red tape involved around foreigners, and how open do you think a policy like this would land, and how open would people hearing this policy be? I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Michael, do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, again, I suppose successful policy must be technically, economically rational, technically feasible, and politically attractive. And I think in this case, you've got something that is clearly technically feasible, that is economically rational, absolutely. It's hard to argue against the economic arguments. But the problem is, again, what is the political constituency you're going to mobilize behind it? Because if you go out there and say, I'm going to allow skilled immigrants open access to the country, the constituency you're going up against are the professional classes, essentially. Doctors, lawyers, financial professors, financial people in the financial sector, and it's not clear that it's going to be in their interest. The very aim of such a policy is to lessen the pressure for skills and so lower the returns to skills so that we can have more capacity at a lower price. And objectively, that is in contradiction with the interests of those professionals. So how are you going to mobilize that political constituency? What is the deal that you're putting on the table that balances the interests of those constituencies against the economic rationality? Or what other constituencies are you going to mobilize against that professional constituency in order to win your objective? So really, I think we agree that we can design technically correct policies, technically feasible and economically rational, but getting the political appetite is the difficult part that we haven't quite managed to succeed on.
Can I just ask one thing? I get Michael's point about getting the political mobilization right, but the question I'd want to ask, especially with respect to this particular issue, is at some point the political story, because it's all about narratives, right? The narrative is up to the politicians to build. That gets people not necessarily on board, because in South Africa right now, it's not clear to me that the professional class would see themselves as losers. They'd probably wake up 10 years down the line and realize that, oh my goodness, all our rents have been eroded, but it's probably too late. But that is not necessarily something that a politician would have to justify up front. And they then, in that context, have the space to create the narrative without having too much of a political cost associated with it. So, that's one thing. That area is one of those things that it's been mind-boggling to me for a long time. Like, why have we not necessarily done this? Because it hasn't been clear to me that the political cost upfront would be that high.
William has a quick response.
Yeah, many countries, the growth strategies of many countries is actually to recruit skills. Right now, the Netherlands is recruiting tech skills and they're taking our skills. Saudi Arabia is taking our nurses' skills. It's their growth strategy. So why can't we have a growth strategy to bring skills? to us is important, but that is that political constraint, when I say the binding constraint. So a lot of our constraints, we mustn't think in terms of technical terms, but these are the real constraints of the economy that we have to take courageously head on.
And all of the judges this morning, I think, pointing to what they would be looking to or for out of the submissions that are going to be entered in this competition. And, it's significant, the kind of potential it could have on rethinking some of South Africa's growth strategies moving forward. I think it's pretty clear why a competition like this is significant right now, prize incentive aside, because certainly 300,000 Rand as the first prize is nothing to
not dollars. I thought it was dollars.
Let's not push the envelope here, but this is an opportunity for South African citizens to get more involved, changing South Africa's economic trajectory as well, and allowing for constructive engagement like we've seen play out today in terms of what needs to change to grow the South African economy moving forward. It really is an opportunity to put new ideas on the table that can see to meaningful progress, right? So there are quite a few details to note when it comes to the competition specifics as well. And I'd encourage you all to visit the website, go online and have a look at some of the rules of engagement as far as entries are concerned. On that note, I'd like to just say a good luck to whoever is going to be submitting here, and thank you to our panelists for joining the conversation today. Before we wrap things up, Francois Gous, who's CEO of PSG, is going to be joining us online now with a few concluding remarks to today's event. So Francois, the screen, I guess, is yours.
Yeah. Thank you, Alicia. It's good morning all. It's a real pleasure to listen to intelligent people talking about complicated topics, so it's most enjoyable. We at PSG, we're a proudly South African firm, and we believe in the future of the country. So we want to be positive and find solutions. We're delighted to join IRSA, the Economics Research of South Africa, in this competition. Clearly, we want to get a better understanding of the phrase and perhaps slogan of inclusive economic growth. As you heard today, there's many complicated dimensions, the social side, the economic side. We spoke quite a bit about binding constraints, limited resources, and then obviously the breaking of eggs, the difficult trade-offs that need to occur. But I think the ultimate challenge in our mind for the contestants is to find an optimized plan that's actually executable. And I think that was the whole idea behind the competition, is really to get access to the best minds in South Africa, those being either academic or professional. And that's where IRSA helped us a lot with the extensive database to access these professionals and academics and help us think about these clearly critical issues for South Africa. I mean, at the same time, we didn't really want to be restrictive. We didn't want to only restrict it to academics or professionals. We wanted to also keep it open for households. Households, need to make ends meet on a daily basis, something that we struggle to do on the national stage. And I think the wisdom of moms and dads and how they cope every day, I think, needs to be introduced into the national debate. So whilst we expect a lot of entries from the professionals, we by no means are discouraging. In fact, we are encouraging households to also participate in this competition. As Alicia has mentioned, there's significant prizes. Clearly, there's a lot of prestige, involved in winning a competition like this, but I think there's also pride. Making a contribution that goes beyond your own narrow interests, making a contribution to South Africa. We have some very prestigious judges. I think you heard from them today. I think in their own right, they can probably write a paper that will make a significant contribution. But I wish them much wisdom in finding the best papers that's suitable in the context of inclusive economic growth, and that can make a contribution to bettering South Africa. So with that, Alicia, I'd like to thank the judges. I wish all the competitors the best of luck. And, I appreciate everybody's participation in this event.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Francois, and thanks for joining us online. Of course, Francois Gous is CEO of PSG, and I guess we're going to hand the mic over now to Forshir Venter. He's CEO of URSA, with their contribution as well.
Yeah, so I mean, URSA is, as mentioned before, Economic Research of Southern Africa. We are a policy and academic think tank. Our main mission is really to drive academic research into the space of policy implementation. So our involvement in this competition was obviously very much in line with our broader mission and vision that we have for the country and as an organization. So we are very excited, and I'd like to really thank our panelists today and our judges more broadly for everything that we've heard from you today. As you would have heard, the kind of problems that South Africa faces in terms of economic growth is very far. We covered everything from education to the township economy to electricity and energy and infrastructure. It all goes very, very wide. And I think it's easy to think when someone would write a paper for something like this that you would want to kind of figure out some silver bullet that figures out everything. But I think it's important that our kind of URSA's role in this is to try and also lead the kind of integrity or the quality of the research to ensure that the research remains focused. We didn't cover all spaces of economic policy. You can go from trade policy to labor policy to fiscal to monetary to environmental. All of these things play a role within economic growth. You don't want to be able to write a paper that covers everything and fixes the whole problem, right? It is around creating your problem statement, understanding what you want to figure out, and then going to either international research or local research, looking what other countries have done, and thinking, how can we apply that to our own context? It is really about thinking through it. It's around being nuanced in your thinking. It is not a conversation around a braai that you have with your friends around the problems that we're going to figure out in the country. It is around taking the counter position in your policy argument. It is about thinking through the unintended consequences of what you might be putting forward and thinking that through in terms of the value structure that defines our society. So that really is really important to me and to URSA in this role, and I believe to PSG as well. So we're very, very excited about this. The other thing that I would want to encourage as well, so obviously we are interested in what the old guard says. They're obviously very wise. But we are very, very interested in new and innovative ideas of people that don't necessarily usually have the platform to share them. And this provides us, or provides people with that opportunity. I have a very cool book that is, that kind of does like 20 pages on like 20 Nobel Prize winners in economics. And what's interesting about the kind of economists or the Nobel Prize winners from back in the day is that their theories came from the places that they worked in. It was they sat, or at least what they observed around them. They saw what was happening in the factory and then built a theory on top of that. And I think, especially if you think about stuff like the township economy, you want to kind of look around and go, well, what is it that would help my community right here? And then go into the broader policy space and think, well, what is the kind of broader policy structure that will achieve that for the people that are around me? And that is what inclusive growth is all about. So we are very, very excited about this. We are very excited about the papers that we are going to get. We want to encourage everyone to be involved. And yeah, we hope for very cool ideas to share with our policymakers. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Forshir. And I guess that's summing it up pretty well. So nothing left for me to really add to that, aside from thank you so much for having joined the conversation this morning. And once again, a very good luck to those of you who are going to be submitting research documents this way. From me, Alicia Sekhmet, bye for now.